Hello everybody, my name is Voodoo and welcome to my 10.1.5 Augmentation Evoker guide. This is a brand new spec coming out in the next patch and a brand new type of spec, a support spec at that. So this guide will go a bit more in depth than my other guides. I'll be going over all of the basic abilities and everything about the Augmentation Evoker. Then we're going into some talents, some rotation, some embellishments, some gear, stats, and all that stuff you guys know and love. A few other things before we get into this guide. I'll be using timestamps down below. If you want to skip all the basic stuff, go ahead and do that, or just jump around to different parts that you want. Also, big shout out to all of the theory crafters from the Augmentation Evoker Discord. Saeldur is a big one, but there are tons of other people there. The information here is cobbled together from a bunch of posts they have there. And finally, this is going live before all of the theory crafting is final. So if things change, I will do a pinned comment down below highlighting what has changed since my video guide has come out. But again, big shout out to the Augmentation Evoker Discord for helping out with things on this channel. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like. Video's doing well with likes, so hit a like, hit the sub, and let's get into it. So as I said, Augmentation Evoker is a brand new spec and also type of spec in the game of World of Warcraft, as it is a support spec. Now, pardon my UI, I'm on PTR, things are kind of scuffed there. But in this little segment, we're going to go over all the important spells and abilities for Augmentation Evoker so that you guys understand the class and what it looks like and what goes into playing the spec. So if we open up our spell book here, we'll go over the basic ones first. Augmentation Evoker, like all evokers, has access to Living Flame, which is a simple cast timer. This is your filler. It can both heal and deal damage. We have access to Azure Strike, which is your filler on the move. It's just a quick little strike like that. We also have access to Fire Breath, which is one of your basic empowers. It is a cone that deals damage. Basically, the number of charge you bring up to it doesn't actually matter. So 1 all the way through 4 is the same damage. However, the longer you charge it, the more that damage is shifted from the instant cast portion to the dot. So charge it up here, we see it's a little cone. Charge it up all the way, we let it go, we see there's a very short dot, but it's going to end up doing the same amount of damage. And there's a little bit of a thing down here. So if you look here again, 1 is less damage instantly and more over time, and 4 is more damage instantly and less over time. So that's very important there. You have access to some green spells that include healing. We'll go over that later. And then you have some defensives like Renewing Blaze, Zephyr, and then finally Obsidian Scales. And also you have access to Lust, Fear of the Aspects. So that's what they share with the other Evoker specs. If you're coming from Devastation, if you're coming from Preservation, you would already know those things. Hover is also their movement cooldown. It's very powerful. It's a dash forward, it's a speed increase, and now you can also cast while moving. Very powerful movement speed increase, honestly. They also have other things that impact it. They also bring a buff in the form of Blessing of the Bronze, which just reduces the cooldown of your movement ability. Now that is it for baseline stuff they share. There's other utility stuff. They have a kick, they have a root, they have a CC thing, but we're not going to go into that right now. Now for augmentation itself, you do have honestly a good bit of buttons while you're doing like the good talent builds. So the basic ones you have are going to be Ebb and Might. This is your main way of dealing damage and interacting with your allies. Basically, you increase your 4 nearest allies' primary stat by 15% of your own, and you also do 14% more damage for 12.3 seconds. It goes on 4 allies. It prefers damage dealers. Now, there is a bit of logic to who and what it prefers. It's going to prefer going on your allies that have something called Prescience on them. Now, Prescience is a buff here. We'll go over it later. That's one of the top priorities. The priority above that is to just extend Ebb and Might on allies already. Then it is to grant Ebb and Might to allies with your Prescience. Then it is to grant Ebb and Might to the closest ally DPS without anyone's Ebb and Might on it. Then it's to give Ebb and Might to tanks or healers without Ebb and Might. And then it's just to give it to the closest ally DPS and then the closest allied tanks healers, which is very weird and can only ever happen if you don't have more than 4 or 4 DPS alive in your raid. So that's very rare, would almost never happen. But that's basically, this is like your main spell. Here's what the cast would look like. Just simple cast, goes on some allies. And you can see here, I have this Augmentation Evoker's buff, so I have more intellect. And then I also have increased damage done. Now I will say, if you get multiple Augmentation Evokers, their buffs won't increase your buff. I know the buff says by a percentage of your intellect. Aug Evokers giving you main stat doesn't increase your buff like that. So don't go thinking out there you can stack 50,000 Augmentation Evokers and get a ton of whatever. Doesn't work like that. Eruption is your main essence spender. Essence is your resource. It regenerates over time. You also have this mechanic called Essence Burst, where your fillers, such as Living Flame, Azure Strike, and Prescience, give you free casts of your essence spells. Eruption is your main spender, like Disintegrate is for Devastation Evoker. You basically use it, it causes like a little AoE explosion, and it also extends your Ebon Might effects by 1 second. So if we cast Ebon Might here, then we cast Eruption, you'll see my duration will increase by 1 second up to 2, and your effects that crit can double this. So if you end up critting, it'll give you twice the duration increase instead of just the normal amount, which is why crit's kind of cool. You can see there I'm using it and I'm just extending my Ebon Might duration. And that's kind of the whole name of the game. Your Empowers also extend your duration. So Fire Breath extends it by 2 seconds. Your other Empower, Upheaval, also extends it by 2 seconds. So this, you just kind of gather power beneath someone's feet. You deal damage to the target and any nearby enemies. And the more you channel it, the more radius is increased. So if we use it here, you see that there's a small radius, bigger, 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 and bigger. The damage doesn't change, it's just how big it is, really. So with this little one, you can actually hit some stacked targets pretty easily. These two here, you probably can just hit with a basic one, see, like that. But to hit more spread out targets, obviously you want to channel that more fully. That's your 2 Empowers, so both of those will increase your Ebon Might. Finally, your big cooldown. Actually, Prescience is your other buff. Sorry, we'll talk to this one first. So you basically give an ally a 3% crit, and then they can sometimes copy their spells and healing at 15% effectiveness. So let's say you put it on another ally, they do damage and it triggers, then they're going to copy 15% of that damage again. That damage is attributed to you. So you don't have to target this, it'll just go on the nearby damage dealer. But you want to use Prescience on cooldown all the time for 2 reasons. One, it can give you Essence Burst, which is very powerful. Just gave me that there, so now my thing is free. It's going to use up no essence. And 2, it's going to A, be a powerful buff, but also target where your Ebon Might is going. So in a raid, when you have 14, 13 other DPS, you want to use your Prescience to target where it's going. You can have 2 Prescience up at once, depending on your mastery, of course, but mastery is your best stat. So 22 seconds it's up, and then there's a 12-second cooldown, so you can have a bit of an overlap. It's right here. So this is a very powerful tool for determining where your abilities go, as well as giving a nice little crit bonus. So you definitely want to get used to using this to give it around. In terms of cooldowns, we have a few. We have this tank cooldown. It's just a little bit of a defensive thing. It can deal damage when they get meleeed. It's actually best to put this on a warrior DPS, but we'll touch on that later. Breath of Eons is your main cooldown. It replaces Deep Breath. So what you do is it's a 2-minute cooldown. You fly to target location, and you basically breathe like timed magic on enemies you pass over. Enemies you pass over basically have a debuff on them that accumulates 21% of damage dealt by your allies that are affected by your buff, and then it critically strikes for that amount as arcane damage, so it'll double it. And then it also applies Ebon Might for 5 seconds and also increases duration. So if I Ebon Might this out here, and then I Deep Breath or Eon Breath, it will increase it up, and then we can see there's this little buff on these target. So if I deal damage to it, you can see here it's going to critically strike for however much arcane damage once it's over. And boom, it just crit. So that's basically how Breath of Eons works. It's pretty simple. You want to line this up with all of your DPS, your other DPS's cooldowns, so you can do a ton of damage. Last few spells here, you have attunements. So Black Attunement is like an HP increase for you and nearest allies. Bronze Attunement is a speed increase. They're both very strong. Black Attunement should be active most of the time. However, whenever you use your movement speed ability, like hover, you'll trigger the other one and increase its effectiveness. So see here, it's like 40% now. So you're super speedy. Then if I use my defensive, my Obsidian Scales, I swap back to Obsidian, and it increases my health by 16%, which is obviously a lot. So you're really tanky with this stuff. The other stuff you have Spatial Paradox. Sorry. You and a friendly healer can cast Moving for 12 seconds and also increases your the healer's yard range by like 100%. So don't think there's a healer nearby, but I can just fully cast Moving now. Doesn't give me the speed increase, but I do have roughly 12 seconds of just full castful moving, which is very powerful. Also should have increased my range, so I can attack from way over here, where normally I can't because the buff just ran out. Finally, Time Skip. This is one of your coolest abilities. So what it does is you basically channel for 2 seconds and recover your cooldowns 1000% faster. So if I were to just do Ebon Might into Fire Breath, into Upheaval, and then I just push my button, you can see my cooldowns are rapidly coming back. That's one of the, honestly, in my opinion, most fun abilities we have as a Augmentation Evoker. But I think it's pretty cool. and will be very useful in raids. So that's kind of the overview of abilities. We'll get on to the actual guide now, but I wanted to do a little bit of a baseline just because this is a brand new spec, brand new thing, kind of catch everybody up on what Augmentation Evoker is. Now, I will say one more thing. Warcraft Logs has worked out how to basically take the damage that you are buffing allies with and attribute it to yourself. So don't be, people might be trying to like steal your buffs from other targets by standing close to you because they think it's gonna affect their parses. It won't. There are a few things like the 3% crit, also like damage from pets isn't attributed very properly, that can affect you and not give you the damage. But as an Augmentation Evoker, it is going to be the most important to buff those high priority targets. We'll cover that later. I'll have a segment on it, but I just wanted to put that out there. So if any player is like, oh, I need an Aug to parse better, the damage they give you is going to go to them, not to your parse, besides a few niche scenarios. So always let your Aug choose who gets the buffs for their own damage. Don't just try and parse 4, basically. So with that out of the way, we will move on to talent builds. A little bit long here, but I wanted to go over all the abilities, give it a little baseline. So talent builds now. So in terms of Augmentation Evoker, you're going to have one main build that changes a little bit depending on the content you're doing. There's another build, a healing focus build. However, that is going to be outside of the scope of this guide. I'm not going to talk about it today. I'll have another video later in the future talking about it. But as an Augmentation Evoker, you are a DPS forward first. The only reason to go to a healer build is to maybe drop a healer in your raid on like a 3 heal fight, where you can kind of pick up the slack and still do damage. But again, we're not going to talk about this today. That is outside the scope of this guide. That'll be something else later. Should you be interested in that, I'll do another video probably in a week or so. But again, not going to talk about it today. So this is your main raid guide and single target. Important talents here on the right side. We're not going to talk about the left side too much. The class tree is pretty much just do what you want. There's a few nodes you want to pick up. Leaping Flames, obviously, Blast Furnace, the magic damage increase, Scarlet Adaptation, Ancient Flame, and Innate Magic. Those are all very powerful things. Otherwise, though, there's really, you can just kind of do whatever you want. On the right side here, though, we do have very powerful talents. So we path down through Defy Fate because it's just Heat Death and it's very insanely strong. We end up grabbing Breath of Eons, come down through Draconic Attunements, and we unlock the bottom row by taking kind of all of these things here. There are a few flex points. Stretch Time and Spatial Paradox, my apologies, are flex points. You can put them wherever you want. You can put this in here if you want. You can put, I don't know, one of them in Innate Radiance, one of them here. These are your flex points. I would recommend using these. These are generally going to be your most valuable ones. But again, flex points. Come down here. Tectonic Locus is just the highest single target damage. If there's a little bit of AoE, you could go on Yielding Domain, but I would recommend Tectonic Locus instead. This point here, Molten Blood, also another flex point. Kind of put it wherever you want. This doesn't do that much damage for you in a single target, but it's still useful for your tank to live. Down here is where things get interesting and important. So up here is kind of just filling down the tree until we get down to the bottom here. Over here, we have things like Inferno's Blessing. Very powerful talent. Fire Breath gives you Inferno's Blessing to you and your allies. Effective Ebb and Might, giving the damage and attacks a high chance to deal fire damage. You have stuff like Plot the Future, giving you Lust whenever you land from Breath of Eons. You have stuff like Momentum Shift. Consuming Essence Bursts gives you Intellect, very powerful. Time Skip, again, a very powerful cooldown. Accretion, Eruption reduces the remaining cooldown of Upheaval or Empower. And then finally we have Mission Rush and Prescience. Prescience, there we go. Sorry, my Canadian accent allows me to not pronounce things correctly. It comes down into Anachronism and Fate Mirror. So Prescience. I don't know. I'll mispronounce it all video. Sorry. Very powerful buff here. This overall is an incredibly strong package. This is kind of your single target. If you want to go to a bit more cleave, then you just kind of change 1 point out for this here. This is a powerful ability, Pupil of Alexstrasza. Whenever you cast an enemy, Living Flame kind of just cleaves to another target for at full value. So this is very powerful. You can double your uptime of Essence Burst Cross, doubles your damage from Living Flame. Incredibly strong when hitting more than one target. So on any cleave fight, this is where you want to go with that. If you want more of a simple build, you can swap in for this. So what this build does is it removes all of the healing stuff over here, so you don't have to green weave. Again, I'll cover green weave later. And then it also talents into Interwoven Threads, which instead of using Time Skip, just flat gives all your cooldowns 10% reduction. And then finally for Mythic Plus, we have this build here. This build here is going to take interwoven threads as well, because it just, cooldown reduction like that is very strong in Mythic Plus. We're also going to grab kick. Kick is incredibly strong. You want a short kick. You want a 24 second, not a 48 second. Again, you are a DPS. And then you just have other stuff. Molten Blood, very useful for tanks. This will actually do some damage for tanks. And then you also just take People of Alexstrasza. So those are kind of your builds. Not a lot of variation. The DPS points are kind of locked in the tree. There's not a lot of wiggle room to get around that. But the talent builds you can do are pretty strong. Again, if you want a more simple one, you can do this one instead. And then for raid, this is your M+ one. And then for raid, you go here. So with that out of the way, we will go into rotation. And then after rotation, I do want to talk about your buff targets, since that is very important as an Augmentation Evoker. All right, so in terms of your rotation, you will have a bit of an opener before your actual damaging windows and stuff like that. And the reason for this is you do want to get out 2 presciences before the actual pull. So the reason for this is because this is where you determine where your Ebon Might is going. Now, in terms of who you should put this on, I'll have a segment after this. So for now, just think about your highest DPS, put them on that, whatever. We'll talk about that in a second. But you do want to get 2 of these out before pull timer starts. So a normal thing would look like when you push this once, then you end up putting your blistering scales on a target, and then you wait for this to come off CD. It takes about 12 seconds, so your pre-pull should be about 20 seconds or so, maybe 12 seconds. This comes off, we push it again, and then it's going to depend if you Ebon Might now or later. So you want to Ebon Might whenever your target is going to burst during that window. You want Ebon Might up as they're doing their maximum burst, basically. So let's just say for now that you end up doing it now. Classes are bursting immediately, right on pull. If you have a class like Unholy Death Knight that bursts a little bit later, the Arcane Mage, then you want to end up delaying it by a few globals, just with Living Flames. But we'll say we do Prescience a few times, so that'll be my second. Then we'll Ebon Might, we'll do our Tip the Scales, and then we'll Living Flame as pull starts. Then we're going to Fire Breath, do our Upheaval. Then we'll delay Breath of Eons a little bit, and then we'll use it. Then we're going to use Eruption twice, just so we don't overcap. And then we're going to use Time Skip, just to get everything back. And then from here, we're just full charging Fire Breath, and we're trying to keep up Ebon Might as much as physically possible through all our casts, through everything like that. We're going to use our Prescience on CD just so that we end up getting more, uses of it. We're going to, we can rewrite Ebon Might once it's under 4 seconds or so, just due to pandemicking. It does pandemic. And we just use Eruption to kind of just fulfill, to just increase it and keep it going as long as we can. On cooldown, you're going to have off pull, sorry, you're going to have like a long Ebon Might window just because of how it works. Whenever we use Living Flame, you also always want to do the maximum amount you can fit inside the window without Ebon Might dropping because of just getting more chances to cleave with Living Flame. That's just going to end up being the best for you. So the complexities to the rotation is going to come down to a few different things, which I will go over in a second. We'll do one more kind of rotation from the window here. So to recap, basically your opener is going to be Prescience into Blistering Scales into another Prescience. Then you want to use Ebon Might if your ally is going to have that burst on cooldown. If not, Living Flame a few times, then use your Ebon Might. Then you want to tip the scales into Fire Breath, always max ranking your Fire Breath whenever you can to get Cleave of Living Flame for more Essence Burst procs. Then you want to minimum rank your Upheaval. Then use Breath of Eons, syncing it up with your other classes' cooldowns. Then pop your Potion, pop your Trinket, use Time Skip, Prescience again, Upheaval, and then just fill using Fire Breath and Upheaval with your Ebon Mights, using Eruption to extend Ebon Might. Save your Eruptions if Ebon Might's going to drop off before you finish your cast. There's no point in doing that. And that's kind of the basic rotation. That's like the easiest way to get it done. Now, the complexities is going to come from a few different things. One's going to be your positioning, because you're going to end up buffing your nearby allies. Another one is going to be something called Green Weaving. Green Weaving is going to be something that Devastation also does, where you use your healing spells during your rotation. Basically, anytime where you're just going to cast an unbuffed Living Flame, it's better to use either an Emerald Blossom or a Verdant Embrace before that, for a few reasons, namely because of Scarlet Adaptation and Ancient Flame. So what these do, Scarlet Adaptation is whenever you deal healing, it stores that healing, and your next Living Flame consumes that to deal damage. And then Ancient Flame, whenever you cast Emerald Blossom or Verdant Embrace, the cast time of your next Living Flame is reduced by 40%. So let's say here all my buttons are on CD. The only thing I have left to push is going to end up being Living Flame. I will use Emerald Blossom first, and then my Living Flame is going to be incredibly fast and deal more damage. Same here. Okay, I'll use Verdant Embrace. Living Flame faster, deal more damage. That's kind of that idea there. So it's going to be something where you're going to be weaving your green spells in throughout your rotation to make your Living Flames faster and deal more damage. All right, so let's talk about buff targeting. Now, there are a few buffs that Augmentation Evoker has to go around. One of them we haven't talked about yet, the ones we have. So the one we haven't talked about yet is going to be your Mastery. Actually, Mastery is very powerful. Time Walker, whenever you cast an Empower spell, so Fire Breath and Upheaval, you end up giving an ally 18.5% verse equal to your Mastery. Obviously, my Mastery should be higher. I'm coming over from Dev, but you're going to give them a large chunk of Mastery. And then also, it increases the duration of the verse buff of Breath of Eons and your other auras like Prescience and Ebon Might by 23.1%, obviously dependent on your Mastery. So this is very powerful. Now, this one does have some targeting things. So Shifting Sands will always target the nearest DPS player with Ebon Might, but without Shifting Sands. Then it'll be the nearest non-DPS player with Ebon Might and without Shifting Sands. Then it goes down to a DPS without Shifting Sands and without Ebon Might. Then non-DPS without both, and then finally it'll refresh on a DPS player with it, should there be nothing else. And this is a very powerful buff. However, for the most part, it will be very passive. It's very set it and forget it, so don't really worry too much about min-maxing Time Walker. By min-maxing Ebon Might, you will be min-maxing Time Walker. Now, talking about Ebon Might, this is a big one. So Ebon Might priority is going to be very important. And I mentioned this briefly, but there is a priority to how Ebon Might targets things. So number one will be it'll extend Ebon Might on existing targets. Number two will be it'll apply it to targets with Prescience, which makes Prescience very powerful for determining where it goes. Number three is nearest DPS players with no active Ebon Might and no Prescience. And then after that, it's nearest non-DPS players with neither, and it'll just apply to nearest DPS players and nearest non-DPS in that order. So that's all well and good, but what specific specs do you want? Now, I'm going to say here right away, for most players in this game, just give it to the best DPS in your raid. That's going to end up being the best for you. That will just be very good as a baseline overall. Best DPS specs in your raid, best players are going to be probably the most deserving of these buffs. However, obviously there are things that benefit very well. So based on how specs are looking in 10.1.5, Frost, Death Knight, Devastation, Enhancement, and Shadow Priest are all very solid targets to receive Prescience throughout the fight without taking into account any timings or anything like that, and they do very well with a 2-minute cycle. Arcane Mage and Unholy on pull do insane amounts of DPS, and you probably honestly want to have Prescience there for Ebon Might for your Breath of Eons on pull because their burst is just so absolutely bonkers. And then afterwards, though, they don't do anywhere near as much damage. You can probably swap off of it. Other good ideas: Marksmanship Hunter, Destruction Warlock, Frost Mage are all very strong if you want to position there to get Ebon Might. Havoc Demon Hunter is an interesting choice because of how their talent Know Your Enemy interacts with your crits. Ebon Might will always, not Ebon Might, Breath of Eons will always crit and will get impacted by Know Your Enemy, which is an interesting thing. Other things, your talent down here, Inferno's Blessing, if it crits, will get impacted by Know Your Enemy. And then things like Prescience, well, it can't crit itself. If you copy a crit from it, does the full Know Your Enemy crit. So Havoc Demon Hunter can be an interesting one as well. But generally, I would say just target the best players in your raid and then try to buff other range with you. Generally speaking, that's going to be best for you. But again, if you can't do that for whatever reason, or you have, you're in a very good group and all your players are relatively equal, then you can determine from there. Finally, the last buff that you actually want to end up giving is Blistering Scales. So Blistering Scales, we covered it a little bit earlier. This one here, protect an ally with 15 explosive dragon scales, increasing their armor by 30% of your own. You're like, why would it just put us on the tank, right? Well, no. So warriors have a talent in their tree called Armor to the Teeth, sort of on screen, where they gain strength equal to 10% of their armor. This works. So if you put it on a warrior, you end up giving them 30% of your own armor. Max geared, you'll have probably 10,000 armor, which is roughly 3,000 armor to a warrior, which gives them 300 strength, and that's a fairly sizable passive damage bonus to their output. So that's very strong there. So always target this on a DPS warrior if you can. Now, all right, so with all that out of the way, let's talk about stats. Now, stats for Augmentation Evoker are going to be a bit different than you might expect. It's not so much that this stat is the best stat, so all secondary stats are kind of just bad for them. And Mastery is actually going to be your best one by far. You want to heavily stack Mastery, almost basically far into the DR as you can. Intellect is going to be your also best stat. So basically you're going to prioritize eye level, and if the piece has Mastery on it, you're going to Pog Face. That's going to be great. The other three stats aren't amazing. Critical Strike and Haste are both kind of equal to each other. Haste compresses your rotation, allows you to cast more upheavals and everything like that, eruptions, whatever, to increase your duration of your Ebon Might. While Crit, of course, can give you the chance to crit your damage, but also if you can crit your extending amount on your Spender and your Fire Breath, stuff like that, which can double how much it extends your Ebon Might. So those are about equal. They're both just to get more Ebon Might uptime. Versatility, incredibly bad. Versatility is a stat that buffs your own damage. Augmentation Evoker does basically not much of its own damage. You're doing like 30k, 40k, 50k DPS. So versatility as a stat is incredibly poor. It's very bad. You pieces might have verse on them, like if they're very high mastery main stat. But in general, verse is so terrible. You want to avoid it as much as physically possible. It's really, really bad for augmentation. Mastery is insane though. Mastery is by far your best stat. It gives you the Sands buff for the versatility on other people, and also increases the duration of all your helpful auras. And then again, intellect is best, followed by crit and haste being equal, and versatility way down at the bottom. All right, so let's talk about embellishments then. So like I mentioned in the stats section, stats are very bad for augmentation. So you want to shift yourself more towards damaging procs. So the best two options for you in terms of damaging whatever are going to be the Acidic Hailstone Treads. These are boots that you equip. They have Critical Strike and Mastery on them, which is very good. They give you a proc chance to deal frost damage, but also slow you by 10%. And then obviously you want to pair that with a Toxified Armor Patch. Now there's some good places to put this. Belt, wrists, places like that are going to be your best options. You can do chest if you're not going for the raid BOE, which is your BIS. Chest is also fine, but belt, wrists, chest, one of those places are going to be the best spot to put your Toxified Armor Patch. This doubles the damage from the Hailstone Treads, but also doubles the slow. Now, as an Evoker, as an Aug Evoker especially, you're very mobile. You have a lot of movement speed, movement tools. Now, that being said, if you don't like the slow, if you don't like being slow by 20%, 10%, then you can use Shadow Flame Tempered Armor Patch, again, on the wrist, on the boots, or on the belt. For each of these you use, it's going to be roughly an 800 to 1000 DPS loss compared to the Hailstone Treads and the Armor Patch, but there's not really much of a downside with the slow. These also scale slightly better in AoE. Again, Hailstone Treads is not very good in AoE either, but it does a lot of damage, so you'll probably end up using that. You can also use Spore Cloak if you want. Now, I wouldn't really recommend Spore Cloak. Again, as an Aug Evoker, you are so tanky. If you end up dying as an Aug Evoker, I'll be very surprised. You have a ton of defensives. But if you feel like you need that survivability, you can run this, again, at a DPS loss, but your personal DPS is not very great anyways, so whatever. Other good crafts are going to be the Obsidian Seared Hex Sword as like a weapon, eventually to be replaced by the Legendary, should you ever get that. The Offhand, the Engineering Bracers with Mastery are also going to be a very good craft, and are going to be best for you in all honesty. They have the most Mastery on them, so I'd recommend crafting that. So again, embellishments, Acidic Hailstone Treads, and Toxified Armor Patch on either belt or wrists is going to be your best spot, probably belt. Outside of that, Shadow Flame Tempered Armor Patch can also work very well. And then Spore Cloak, and then other good crafts are going to be Weapon, Offhand, and the Engineering Wrists, the Complicated Cuffs. In terms of trinkets, your best trinket in basically all scenarios is going to be Iridius Fragment. This is an incredibly strong trinket which translates into Ebon Might value. You pair this with your Breath of Eons, does a ton of damage. Outside of that though, we don't really want secondaries, so the other best trinkets are going to be just damaging proc trinkets. Vessel of Sitting Shadow is a very strong one from Raid. It gives you haste and deals some damage, which is pretty strong. Outside of that, Rock Crusted Voodoo Doll is also a very strong option. It gives you intellect, you just kind of brandish it and deal damage. And then for M+, a Beacon to the Beyond is an incredibly solid choice as your other slot, just to do damage in an AoE setting. So Iridius Fragment, always, always, always. And outside of that, just strong damage trinkets, stuff like Vessel of Sitting Shadow, Rock Crusted Voodoo Doll, and Beacon to the Beyond. In terms of tier set, Augmentation Evoker does have one. It's actually pretty interesting. It's not very like complex. Basically what it does is the 2-step bonus ends up increasing your empower spells while you have Ebon Might by 30%, so a nice little personal damage increase. And then the 4-set is Ebon Might increases allies' primary stat by an additional 1% of your own. So nothing too complex, but it is a nice little power gain, giving you more primary to your allies, as well as a little bit more personal damage during your augmentation buff window. Now your best weapon, I'm going to touch on this, is going to be the Legendary. The Legendary is very frustrating for people to get. There's roughly very low percentage chance on the highest difficulty Sark you kill per week. So don't feel too discouraged if you don't get it. You can just craft a weapon instead, but the Legendary weapon is going to be your best craft. So honestly, work on trying to get that. If you don't get it, unfortunate, there are other options, but it's a very strong weapon. It's incredibly busted, honestly, and I do hope they make it a little bit easier to get in general. Alright, so let's talk about consumables. So best weapon enchant is going to be Stoic Devotion, and the best ring enchants are going to be Devotion of Mastery. From there, just use all the normal stuff you end up using. I'll throw up this little list from Wowhead for you guys up on screen here if you want to check that out. Shout out to Jericho, the writer of the Wowhead guide, for that. Pretty useful thing. I'll also link it in the description, and I'll also link the Augmentation Evoker Discord in the description, because they're great too. Anyways, so with that out of the way, there are also files and stuff. So Ice File is pretty good. Glacial Fury is also pretty good. They're both strong files that give you good damage or crit stuff. Now, strictly speaking, File of Static Empowerment, which is remaining stationary, will increase your primary stat by 623 over 5 seconds, and moving it consumes that. That's very strong. However, File of Charged Isolation is also strong, which is you gain primary stat when you're away from allies. If you can get the most out of these, particularly File of Static Empowerment, which can also work against the slow from your boots, and they're going to be best. However, if you can't get the most out of them, if you have to move often, if you can't stand isolated, then you're going to have to use one of the other options, which are worse but are still fine in the long run. So with that, we're going to come to the end of my Augmentation Evoker guide. Now, I will have more Augmentation Evoker content in the future. My channel is going to be focused on Havoc Demon Hunter, but I am branching out into some other classes. Devastation and Augmentation are one of them. Probably do some Ret Paladin too in the future, but we'll see on that one. So that will be coming in the future. I'll do some more videos and stuff like that. Before we end the video off, though, I do once again want to shout out all the people from the Augmentation Evoker Discord. I know Saeldur is one of the people who has done a ton of different theory crafting for them. Other people, Jericho, Zindern, just everybody down there. I know I'm forgetting some names, but shout out to all of them. If you have any questions, there is a link to the Discord in the description below. I will also link the Wowhead guide, which is a nice little written up guide to help people just if they have any further questions or need to clarify something. Again, though, if you have questions, you can drop them and I will do my best to answer them. Augmentation is a brand new spec. There's lots of cool things going on with it. I will be doing it as a main alt. I'll be rating on it once a week and probably do some keys and stuff. So again, if you want to check that out, hit the sub button. Make sure you like the video as well. Drop a comment down below. And if you want to help me grow the channel, consider becoming a channel member. There's a link in the description. You get a ton of cool perks and stuff like that. So again, Augmentation Evoker, pretty exciting. That's going to be it for the guide. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, good luck on your buff journeys, everybody. I'll see you guys Friday with my next video. So that'll be it for me. Peace. A big thank you to my channel members, 121, Payne, Zuligan, James, Evangel Faraz, Oxclamation, Brad Wisnack, It's Bulk, Flapship67, and Angelo. Big shout out to all you guys. Really appreciate it. Your support means so much to me. If anyone else wants to become a channel member, get access to a ton of cool perks, including special stuff in my Discord, access to log review, VOD review, emotes during streams and on comments. And make sure you click the link below, follow it, become a channel member. Help support me make some great content for you guys. Again, big thank you to you all, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.